What does colonialization have to do with the church in different parts of the world? What are the conditions in different countries that make it more likely for sex trafficking and child slavery to occur? And is there an organization somewhere that's doing something to make things better? And who is Joash Thomas? We're going to answer all of these questions and more in this episode of the Follow Podcast. Welcome to episode 21 of the Follow Podcast, an honest and open conversation for anyone who is actively learning to live like Jesus. And this is a special one-shot episode coming out of the weekend at OneChurch.to, where we were talking about Love Global. And this is our ministry philosophy and our approach to making a difference all around the world, including some of our ministry partners that are doing great things around the world. We actually had a national director for IJM Canada, International Justice Mission, Joash Thomas, joined us, and he was teaching on the weekend gathering. And it was fantastic. We're going to put a link to that in the show notes and the description. But after that, we actually had a conversation with our online community that was mediated by our lead pastor, Pastor Jonathan Smith. And it was such a great conversation. Many of you were probably part of it. And we thought this was right in line with the heart of the Follow Podcast. We thought, man, this would be great to bring to this community. So without further ado, here's our conversation with Joash Thomas.
Great to be with you. I have Joash Thomas here, and we're going to do some Q&A. I'm already in the chat room. I'm seeing some of your comments, and I know that was rich, meaningful, deep, and challenging, Joash. And every time I hear you speak, I hear that same tone. You're so generous, and at the same time challenging. And I've always felt like here at this church, our posture has always been, we want to encourage anyone who gathers in, because we know life beats up on people and we want you to leave encouraged. But encouragement without challenge creates a church then that plays maybe to consumerism. But challenge without encouragement plays to a church that might be more judgmental in nature and more legalistic at times. Yeah. And so we try to hold those two things in tension. Every time I hear you speak, Joash, you do this so well. It's such a natural tension. So I'm going to encourage you, drop your questions in the chat if you have questions for Joash. Otherwise, I have some questions for Joash. Please. And in fact, I'm going to drop into the chat a couple of links to a book that you are releasing here this fall called The Justice of Jesus. And I'm putting in a link to Amazon, where you can pre-order it now. And I'm putting in a link to Indigo because it's Canadian, where you can also pre-order it. These two links will be available. You can pre-order the book. And if you do pre-order it, it does help the algorithm, helps it to go up. But why don't you tell us just briefly, what is this book about, The Justice of Jesus?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Well, first off, I just want to thank each of you at OneChurch.to. You are such an inspiration to me. And you're actually one of the reasons why I wrote this book, which is why your church community is mentioned in this book very prominently as a church community that's a positive example of a church that's prioritizing the justice of Jesus. So, this book came about from really years of doing this work of justice at IJM on my own, and seeing the pushback that I often get from people, especially well-meaning Canadian Christians, North American Christians who love Jesus, but don't think that justice is that important. When if you look at the life of Jesus, you see justice is so prominent throughout his life in the Gospels. So I just thought it'd be good to offer some critique of where we need to rethink things, but also some encouragement at the same time with what churches right now are already embodying the justice of Jesus so well, and your church is one of the churches that I mentioned. And
well, that's a challenging comment when you say well-meaning Christians. Yeah. I know exactly the person you're talking about, so to speak. But that maybe justice isn't that important. Isn't that important compared to what? And how does that get parsed out in our Canadian context?
Yeah, that's so true. So one bit of feedback I often get from Canadian church leaders even is, we get that justice is important, but it's not as important as evangelism or discipleship or spiritual formation. Those things are more important, right? And I think one of the core messages in my pushback with this book is Jesus, his gospel, his good news is both spiritual and physical. It's not just spiritual and it's not just physical. It's both spiritual and physical, and the spiritual comes through the physical. I just heard an inspiring story here from Pastor Dan about how someone walked into one of your food banks and through the physical help that was offered, his life was transformed and has gone back to his home. And now his family's lives are transformed because they're like, who is this person who gave his life to Jesus now and looks very different? And so now they're coming to the church, and there have been some baptisms in that family as well, from what I hear. And I mean, when I heard Pastor Dan share that story from this church, I was so encouraged because I was like, this is exactly the message of the book.
Right.
We need to prioritize the physical so that the spiritual is also made known.
You dropped in the message a couple of thoughts, a couple of comments about decolonizing one's faith. And this has been a fascinating journey for me, as I've learned a lot over the last number of years. But when you talk to us, what does that even mean? Practically speaking, for an everyday follower of Jesus here in Canada, who might be a newer immigrant or might be second gen, or maybe like I'd be second gen, but like a long time ago, my family. So I've grown up here. What's the challenge for us to decolonize our faith? What does that look like? How do you think it affects us, practically speaking?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And what I often tell people, and what I say in the book, is that first off, colonization isn't an academic concept for so many of us in the world, right? So many of you at OneChurch.to, we're from countries where colonization was a reality, and we've seen how it's decimated our countries, what it did to our countries. But my argument is that colonization wasn't just bad for the colonized, it was also bad for the Western church that supported this work of colonization. These are historical facts, right? So injustice isn't just bad for the oppressed, it's also bad for the oppressor and for those on their side. And because of our Western church's participation in colonization, it's actually shaped us to resist justice for our marginalized neighbors, even here in North America. And so that's something that I encourage us to, introspect on and provide a positive way forward, because I think critique, all throughout the Bible, you see the prophets offering both critique, but also hope and saying, here's what you are doing right. Here's what can go better. And here's a positive way forward. And Jesus offers that too with the early church. So yes. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Well, maybe give us an example of like just how decolonizing your faith can maybe change the theological framework. Like an everyday Christian, how do we? It's not just our relationship to us. And I think it's sometimes in the Western church, we can get very focused on how does this affect me? Yeah, I think that's a portion of it. But how does it affect the way we see the world, or should it? And how should it affect the way we even see our neighbor?
That's so good. That's so good. I think colonization conditions us in many ways to worship power, which is why you have this thing called Christian nationalism going on right now, where it's Christians who love Jesus, but are a bit misguided in their love for Jesus and think that loving Jesus means accumulating power. Whereas if you look at Philippians 2, if you look at Jesus' life in the Gospels, Jesus is all about giving power away. He's all about giving wealth away, giving generosity, And he does that. He lays down his life so that we see human flourishing and the world's wholeness and shalom. And so I think that's one of the things that colonization has conditioned many of us in the Western church to worship power, to worship status, to look for wisdom from some types of neighbors and not others.
Right.
So we think of the rich and the powerful, and we're like, we need to learn from them. We need to take advice from them. But Jesus said, blessed are the poor, because God is already on their side. So what about learning from people who are poor? Don't we have things to learn from them? Don't we have things to learn from our disabled neighbors, from our neighbors in communities that the church has historically not loved or served well? So it's good for us to sit in the discomfort.
Right.
Of those things.
So let's talk minority majority world. So if you've probably heard Joash use that comment a lot, like that the minority Christian world is really the Western church. The majority Christian world is the rest of the world. And I like even some of your historic leaning in that sometimes we think in the West that I mean, the church in Canada is like a couple hundred years old.
Mm,
You're talking thousands of years. I mean, your whole own
yeah,
family in India
yeah.
comes from a long tradition, hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's lots to be learned. But if you were thinking of the Canadian church
Mm,
in context, what in humility do you think are lessons we should be grabbing from the majority world, the
wow,
global south?
that's so beautiful. So, back to Sri Lanka, I was there for this global church conference.
Mm,
And again, one of the things I mentioned in my sermon that astounded me was how persecuted church leaders are seeing justice as important. Justice for their neighbors who aren't Christian as
mm,
important. And that's so different from what we see here in the West, where, so I worked as an American political consultant for many years, and I would often see Christians in the US saying things like, we need Christianity in our schools, and
mm,
we need school prayer and things like that, and not think as much about justice for our neighbors who weren't Christian. But persecuted Christians are thinking about justice as something that's holistic, because they understand that if I push for human flourishing of all, it also benefits us in the church, and it magnifies Christ's name.
I love it. We've got a number of questions here in the chat room, so
Yes.
let's nail a few of these. Matthew asks, in our today lives, what's something we can do to be part of fighting what's going on in the Philippines?
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for asking that question. I would say the three most impactful things you can do here in Canada: pray, give, and advocate. So pray for our work. That should be a given, but our prayers ultimately form us to seek justice. So pray, start with prayer. Giving, give to Love Global. You're
Mm,
already doing that as a church community. Maybe your small group could do a fundraiser for
mm,
Love Global. There are
mm,
creative ways to do
mm.
giving as well. And then advocate. So if you go to ijm.ca/advocacy, you can sign up for advocacy email alerts. We're going to be getting more active with the Canadian government and asking the Canadian government to crack down on this
Mm.
crime of online sexual exploitation, because in the Philippines, it's 15 years for perpetrators in prison. In Canada, it's 2 years, according to the RCMP.
Wow.
So we've got work to do in Canada.
Great comment from Care. Thank you, Joash, for sharing your time with us. I was born in India and have seen and heard of some of the sexual trafficking on very young people. Thanks for sharing that, Care. And Sarah asks this: what's unique in Philippines that makes girl sexual exploitation prevalent in their communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really two things. The widespread use of English. So Philippines is really unique in that massive English-speaking population, which makes it easy for bad guys to take advantage of. And then also easy access to broadband internet. Broadband internet in the Philippines was one of the first countries to be so easily accessible. So the things that can be used for good are often used for evil, and vice versa. And we've seen abusers do that, unfortunately.
Yeah, so more on an alignment of certain strategic things like the English language and technology, less about the culture, just more about those things that
Yes.
make it more available for people who have already a bent towards harm and hurt and profiting. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, this could happen here too.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
we
Yeah,
were
yeah,
colonized. I mean, the
yep,
Philippines has had 3 colonial powers in the
right,
past,
right,
and that's decimated their justice system.
right.
So weak justice systems also lead to a lack of protection.
Den says, I would like to send prayers and blessings to Joash for all that he has done, he has endured, and to thank him for doing what he does. I'll share with you some of my strength so that you can continue the work of Jesus. So just some
Thank you,
encouragement from Den. Varvam, I hope I'm saying your name right. Sorry. My question is, when you rescued the children, is the family involved, or do you remove the child or children from those environments?
Great question. So in the Philippines, 80% of our cases, the family is involved. Unfortunately, 40% of the time it's parents, and the other 40% of the time it's a relative that the kid trusts that takes advantage of them. So what we do is we have to separate them from their unsafe family members. We have to seek restoration for them in therapy, aftercare homes that are run in partnership with church partners, and then only reintegrate them with safe family members in the future.
That's a great question. Matt asked, Joash, is there a specific example of how someone from the West has learned/benefited from those who are poor? For those of us who aren't as directly connected, it's hard to picture what that could look like.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I think what comes to mind is the last time I went to the Philippines, I took a bunch of Canadian pastors, denominational leaders, and we met this group of survivors who were telling us about their faith. And some of us on our group were going through a really difficult seasons in life and ministry, and we were wrestling with our faith. So we asked these survivors, "Wait a second, what you've gone through is way worse. I mean, this is horrible. Like what the trauma, the abuse you've experienced. How do you still worship Jesus? How do you still follow Jesus? How do you still trust Jesus?" And the responses that they gave us were better than any seminary lecture I've ever attended.
Wow. I mean, in my limited, I've never traveled to the extent you have and been exposed like you have, Joash, but in my limited travels, I have worked in persecuted regions of the world.
Yes.
And even when we were going through COVID, I think I drew on a lot of lessons I learned from truly persecuted churches. As the church sometimes felt persecuted here, and it wasn't. We were responding in love and justice to our neighbors to be able to care for the greater community. I don't want to unlock the whole COVID can, but I'm saying there were so many great lessons there to be learned.
Yeah.
And to also be able to see the difference between maybe convenience and persecution and the differences that might be there.
Yes.
But it's exposure to other regions. That's why I think everybody should travel. And I know I'm talking to OneChurch.to, and we travel. Many people have traveled many regions of the world. But reading is also a great option. I really encourage you to, John, as in the chat, if you're still with us, he's put the link for the advocacy email that you can participate with IGM. Great way to stay educated and also stay in the fight through the advocacy side. But also, too, I'd encourage you to pick up, I have not read your book yet, Joash, but I'm looking forward to grabbing it. But check that out and check out the section on OneChurch.to. That'd be great for you to see us there. One last comment here, and this is from Genevieve. How can IGM and organizations like ERDO reach out to specific Filipino and Asian churches here in Canada to educate them as well, including other specific churches as well?
That's a beautiful question. I think so much of this comes from relationships. And maybe these are relationships that your community has that IJM doesn't have. So I would invite you, if you have relationships with Filipino churches, with other diaspora churches that you think we should be connected with, we would love to connect with them. I lead a team across Canada that connects with churches, and we're actually trying to connect with diaspora churches more. So you'd be serving our mission in a beautiful way by making any introductions. So yeah, talk to Pastor Jonathan and get my information, and we'd love to connect with them.
Well, Joash, we love your work. We've been in partnership for a number of years. I think I first found you on Twitter, I think it was, and I don't always recommend Twitter right now, as Twitter's not for the faint of heart. I've had many friends actually exit that platform recently, but like either way, I think what challenged me was your voice of kindness to the church. You love the church, but your voice that challenged the accepted norms, especially of the Westernized church. And I think you said an immigrant twice over, I think you immigrated to the U.S. and you're actually part of the political system there for a number of years. And it was your faith that made that dissonance between those power structures and what you were called to do.
Yeah.
And IJM provided a platform and a place for you to exercise your gifts. But I've really enjoyed watching your journey, educating yourself in some of the most conservative theological seminaries here in North America, and at the same time, educating yourself in some of the most liberating and voices theologically globally. If you could give us one or two, I'm going to put you right on the spot. I didn't know if Joash is one or two great authors that are not Western based theologians that really have influenced some of your thought, or you'd recommend to the average person. I know there's probably some stuff that maybe would be so dense that maybe I wouldn't read it all, but what would be something, an author you'd recommend or two that would be representative of the majority world that theologically could influence us?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, you don't see a lot of representation from the majority world, which is also why I'm writing this book. But I would say, so I'll give two recommendations. One, one from the marginalized Western Church, the Black Church, and then one from the Global South Church. So the marginalized Western Church, James Cone is one of my favorite authors. Very challenging, like the stuff he says challenges me too, but he has this amazing book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Highly recommend that book. It's probably the best systematic theology book I've read. It basically talks about the suffering of Jesus and the cross of Calvary, and he compares that to the suffering of Black people who were lynched in the U.S. South. So really, really good theology in there. From a global South standpoint, I would say, majority world standpoint, I would say Latin American liberation theologians. So there are a number of Latin American Catholic priests who realized that their Western education in Christian theology did not match their context where there was poverty and oppression. And so they came up with their own theology for that context, and it's beautiful. So Gustavo Gutierrez, Leonard Boff, folks like that.
Yeah. These are great authors, great opportunities. A couple more comments just coming in before we sign off. Marvin just says, hi, Joash. We sponsor children from other parts of the world. Are there sponsorship programs in the Philippines? And there likely is with IJM. I know Child Care Plus, which is part of Erdo, they do that too. And we actually, Shelly and I sponsor a young girl in the Philippines whose mother died of cancer at age 1. It makes her vulnerable.
Wow.
And so we actually support her. That's a great organization. Does IJM do sponsorship or?
Yeah. We don't have sponsorship. What we do is we have a monthly Freedom Partner program. So you can go to IJM.ca and go to our website. You'll see that opportunity for monthly giving, and that does go towards rescuing and restoring these children on a monthly basis. But yes, look for other organizations too.
A few weeks ago, we highlighted World Vision, Compassion Canada, and Erdo, Child Care Plus, because those are 3 organizations that we have a relationship with. We have a lot of their staff that actually attend our church. And we believe in their mission. They do justice the Jesus way.
And we partner with all of those organizations.
That's awesome.
That you mentioned.
That's awesome. A couple more comments here. Just thank you to you from Genevieve. Monty says, Joash, what do you do to stay positive dealing with such tragic situations? Wow.
That's a beautiful question. I think for me personally, as well as IJM globally, we have these spiritual disciplines of prayer that really ground us, because the reality is we can't take on this darkness on our own. We're going to get burned out. We need to do this in the power of Christ. And so our staff teams all over the world gather 30 minutes for individual stillness time and 30 minutes for corporate prayer. It's mandatory. It's part of the employee handbook. And we have to do that to keep ourselves, to keep our head above the water in this.
What a thoughtful question, Monty, because I think anytime, that's why I think comfort is such an alluring thing. And that's why it's even uncomfortable to talk about justice issues sometimes.
Yeah.
If we're not suffering it, it's hard to peel back the cover and participate and jump into it. But Henry Nouwen, great author, talks about true compassion is entering in to people's suffering and journeying with them.
Wow.
It's not standing aloof in a place of comfort. And that's what even donation can be if we don't participate with our heart in this and in our giving.
So good.
We got to go. We have another gathering. If you're local in the area, come on by. We're going to have another gathering. Thank you, Joash, for coming. You have real fans here at OneChurch.to. We love you. We love International Justice Mission, and we're proud to have you as our partners. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for being a part of this incredible community. You inspire us every day. And thank you, Pastor.
See ya. Bless you guys.
Well, thank you for being a part of this conversation. Thank you to Joash Thomas for sitting down with Pastor Jonathan and having the conversation. Thank you to IJM Canada, International Justice Mission, for all the great work that they are doing around the world. It's such a privilege to partner with them. Now, if you want to learn more about IJM Canada or anything else that was mentioned in the conversation, we're going to have links in the show notes and the video description, depending on where you're tuning in. And listen, we're very excited about season 6, the full season that we're planning. It's going to be a really good one, and I can't wait to share that with you. But until then, thanks for being a part of this honest and open conversation for anyone who is actively learning to live like Jesus. See you soon.